Hello everyone, this is Darcinovia here, and this is my video on the first of many of Che's diaries, the most famous of them being the motorcycle diaries. Now, why am I talking about the motorcycle diaries? What makes this so important? Why should you, the viewer, care about the motorcycle diaries? Well, if you are a serious Marxist and you want to learn about various revolutionaries, it's essential that you read about them. Che being the most famous of the global south, the only other ones that could possibly rival him in terms of famous is Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro. But I'll talk about Fidel another day. What makes Che so, you know, interesting? Why is Che, such a cultural icon? Despite over half a century after his death, there's still many people around the world that continue to be fascinated by Che and want to read about him. Now, the Motorcycle Diaries is not the best place to start if you want to learn about Che, considering it's not entry level material. I would recommend reading the biography by John Lee Anderson first, at least up until a point, so you could at least have some context for what Che talks about in the Motorcycle Diaries. This, you got to keep in mind, is Che, who is a younger man, and he holds some views that may not be politically correct or may not be something that is acceptable today. But context matters, and the Motorcycle Diaries is Che in his youth, before, he becomes Che Guevara. Now, he's not known by his birth name, and I'm not going to butcher it in this video because I'm very terrible, pronouncing Spanish names. But here in this diary, we learn a lot about the young Che before he meets Fidel Castro. Now there is another Motorcycle Diary that's a sequel that actually, that's a life-changing event for him, but that isn't in here. Now, the reason why I find this fascinating is it isn't very often that you get to read diaries of revolutionaries. Che wrote a lot of stuff. I mean, he's probably, written more than any revolutionary I can think of. So it is actually easier to actually grasp what he was thinking in these situations. And considering that the Motorcycle Diaries is not a long book, it's pretty thin. You probably can get through it within a few afternoons, depending on how fast you read. What makes this an interesting read for me is getting inside the head of a young Che before he becomes Che, the man that everyone around the world has heard of. For some people, he's infamous. For some people, he's famous. Most people know Che from, unfortunately, that image that you pretty much see in a bunch of shirts. A lot of people that wear Che shirts, because, it looks cool, don't actually bother actually going out of their way to actually read about the man. And I find that really sad, if I have to be honest with you. Because Che is a very interesting character. He's an interesting person. And I honestly can't really say much more. It's a very thin book, that details, his first tour in that region And I personally think that you know, if you've read, the biography of Che Guevara, the one by John Lee Anderson, which is, I'm pretty sure that's what most people have read first, you'll gonna want more. If you want more, there's a lot, and it could be a little overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff to read about Che. If you want to read his diaries, the first one to read is the Motorcycle Diaries, and I think it's the most essential because you get to read about, what Che was thinking, the poverty that he saw, and you get to see, what would eventually lead him into embracing Marxism, Leninism, because he sees a lot of screwed up shit in his day. He goes throughout all of South America. He go from Venezuela, Chile. Though he doesn't go to America in this volume, I still think that when you read this book, which it does something that it makes you want to read more. I think Che Guevara was an amazing writer. The way he wrote is something that he could have easily, if he honestly have been a writer if he wanted to, because I think he's that good of a writer. I really do, like, you know, how Che describes the things that he sees, and this book actually makes Che more human. If you read this, diary, you get more inside the man's head. You actually get to learn about what he was, and reading his development at this point of his life is something that I think every Marxist who's serious about learning about the global South and icons of the global South like Che, Fidel Castro, I think you owe it to yourself to read the Motorcycle Diaries. It's not a long book. You can get through it very quickly. And it does have a snippet at the end about his speech to students after the Cuban Revolution. Though I'm not going to discuss that speech because I'm going to talk about it another time when I talk about the Che Reader, which has the entire speech in full. In conclusion, even though this is a short video, I'm going to do more of these, so this is a short review. The Motorcycle Diaries, in my opinion, is one of the most essential things to read if you want to learn about the history of the global South. Because reading Che's diaries, you actually get to learn about the situation of the global South at that time, which isn't that much different now than it was during Che's time. But you get more context. You actually learn what motivates Che, what causes him to ultimately become a communist, what ultimately causes him to pick up a gun and fight with Fidel in the Cuban Revolution. The Motorcycle Diaries is something that you read after you've read the Che book by John Lee Anderson. Do I think you need to read the whole book to do so? No. I think the Motorcycle Diaries is a good companion piece. While John Lee Anderson does talk about Che's experiences in his first tour through Latin America, I think reading the Motorcycle Diaries gives you far more context because you're reading it from Che's perspective completely. Che, as a writer, he writes very beautifully, and I think he's a great writer, and I think that's another reason I think I would recommend reading it. If you are somebody that is interested in learning about the global South and you don't know where to begin because there's so much information, you can't go wrong with Che. Though, don't start with the Motorcycle Diaries if you want to read about Che Guevara. read the Motorcycle Diaries as a companion for the John Lee Anderson Che book. And I will be bringing up this book a lot when I talk about these other diaries. The next time I talk about the Che Guevara diaries, I'm going to talk about the second time that he toured through Latin America. Because there's a lot more stuff in that one that shapes Che to the man that he ultimately becomes. I know this has been a short review, but I really can't say much. I'm still new at doing these nonfiction reviews, so I'm sorry if this comes off as being a little short, but I'll come back and visit these diaries again. This is the first of a series. Anyway, later, comrades. Stay safe. May the force be with you. Later.